Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Wednesday already. This week, kind of a blur. This was a holiday weekend, Martin Luther King weekend. So I had Friday off for a teacher conference thing, and then I had Monday off because of the holiday. And then yesterday we had a snow day, so I only have like 3 days of work. So this week is pretty mellow. But we got a pretty good sized snowstorm yesterday. We had about 7 inches or so. And school, where I work, the Montessori school was closed or had early release. So it was pretty out. It was a nice day. I just kind of hung at home and got some practicing in and some work done here at home. It was great. And of course, watched some movies. So I have a big show coming up this week. I'm gonna probably do it tomorrow. I just finished the first season of Game of Thrones. I've been very behind the ball as far as that series goes. I think it's just incredible. I am going to most likely continue on. I I will say though, part of me is a little bit reluctant to keep watching it only because of the length. Because it is, I believe there's 8 seasons, and so I love watching movies. I love movies for the reason, well, for many reasons, but mainly because it's the feeling of completion, one and done. I like to watch a variety of different films during the week, during the night. I love that conclusive thing. I don't like for even in the case of really really great storylines, great films. I have a little bit of a reluctancy when things go on just a little too long, even if the writing is incredible or the direction is incredible. But so it's a funny thing. It's a funny balance. And Game of Thrones is a very lengthy TV show, but very, very good. So we will see, and I should continue on. But anyway, I also got to watch a movie I'd never seen before. I went to Bull Moose, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and I got a bunch of new movies. One of the movies I did review when I first got it, and it was a movie I was seeking out when I went there. I don't usually go there when I go shopping at Bull Moose. I don't usually have a plan, only because I like the sense of discovery, coming across a title or a movie that I heard about or read about somewhere, or a movie that I saw many years ago. A lot of the times it's discovering new movies completely, from the unknown, and I usually buy movies that way. With my last trip, I did go there with the intention of buying Prey, which is was the latest installment to the Predator series, and I really really like that movie. And I did actually 3 shows on that movie. I did one where I talked about when I first got to see it, which was on DVD, and I rented it from Opera's Video here in Belfast. That was my first time seeing it, and then I went out and bought it, and I did a show on seeing it and owning it on Blu-ray. And then afterwards, I realized you could watch the movie in its native language, which was Comanche, which was kind of funny. And I did not realize that you could do that, so I watched it in Comanche, and that became my favorite. That's my favorite version of the film. And then so I did another review of the film based on that. So it's pretty funny. So last night I watched a movie by one of my favorite directors, uh, Jess Franco. He is a Spanish director. I've covered quite a few of his films on this channel. Um, he is, I don't know, he's such an icon, I feel. He is, one of the most iconic, probably, I have to say too, probably the most prolific director that I've ever come across in the history of film, in my searches and in my discoveries with people that I've been very familiar with, directors that I've been following for a long time, and then also directors that I have discovered over the years that have a huge canon or body of work. Jess Franco, I feel like his body of work is unparalleled. And his movies are just these. His films are so interesting where they bounce back and forth between multiple styles. He almost creates his own genre. His films are definitely Giallo inspired, or Giallo films, I should say, but they are also, they definitely have elements of horror and also elements of like extreme psychosexual themes. And his films tend to be very dreamlike and very surrealist. There's always a surrealist quality to his films. But again, he is such an unconventional director. You know, you have your for a lot of things you have, for, but in this case, film, or how one shoots a film, or there being a set guideline, or you have a say you have, a template for how a film gets made, where you have, you assemble a cast, you have the obviously the script being written, and the film gets financed and directed. But there's, for typical movies, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's a certain kind of narrative of the film. There is elements of horror. There could be elements of horror. There could be elements of mystery or romance, eroticism. There's also, hopefully a sense of character development. But then there's like an arc to the certain characters. But it follows, more or less a blueprint, or a way of tradition in the way of storytelling. And I feel like Jess Franco is one of those directors, and he's unlike any director that I know of, where he'll take that kind of template on how most people make movies. And I feel like what he does is he throws all of those rules out completely and just kind of reinvents that whole thing for his own vision. Where there's not like, he'll take multiple genres of different films, elements of the classic, giallo style, where there's like this murder mystery aspect. He'll take elements of horror. He'll take elements of, supernatural elements. He'll take elements of melodrama. And he takes lots of elements from the adult film world, or eroticism, and then he'll take lots of influences from a lot of surrealist directors, or even painters for that matter. Jess Franco is also a musician, so music is such an integral part of his films. So he'll take, genres that have never really been combined together in the same film in this incredibly strange and very unorthodox way. He'll do that repeatedly in many of his films. He'll also take like your traditional idea of like what a structure is, or even dialogue, and like the traditional reason for a good screenplay, where you become, hopefully as the viewer, invested in the characters. There's an arc to the characters. He takes all of that kind of concept or idea, and I don't know, to a degree just turns it on its head and does something completely different. Some of his films, where there's actually, very little dialogue, or no dialogue, and there's no way of, and I think it's on purpose. There's no like traditional, to a degree, starting point to a lot of his films. There is an arc, but sometimes there isn't, and there is not any real description. You're just kind of brought into this strange dream. And again, you can't pinpoint him and say, well, he's a horror director, or only he directs he mostly directs war films, or westerns, or giallo films. He defies that any kind of categorization that way. He'll take elements from all of those genres, and he'll put them in this surrealist project. So the movie that I watch, and again, I have quite a few of just Franco's movies. He's one of my favorite directors. And each movie that I see of his, I just fall in love with it more and more, and I just find myself, realizing the genius of who he was. He was also, I think, just Franco is a multifaceted figure, I think, in the world of film. I think on one hand, he was like a real kind of trashy exploitation director, but I think outside of that, or in the core of his nature, I feel like he was a real auteur. He was a real a master filmmaker, and he's still, I believe he's still alive. I think at his core, he was a master filmmaker and a real visionary, and such a unique, one of the most unique voices in the world of film, and especially in the world of exploitation. All of his films, I could say, you could safely, you can easily say, and it's safe to say, he is definitely an exploitation director. His movies are very sleazy, very low budget at times. They are they have this incredibly a real trashy element, but they are also pretty graphic, and they tackle taboos and subjects that are kind of shocking, and where he will take you in that journey. And this movie is one of those experiences. This is Lorna the Exorcist. I picked this up my last trip to Bull Moose in Bangor. This film came out in 1974, and this movie, I don't even know how to begin to talk about this movie. It's a beautiful package, beautiful transfer on Blu-ray. It was put out by Kino Lorber, which is a distributor or a company that they do release exploitation movies. They tend to release lots of European films. Kind of similar, I think. Kino Lorber is kind of similar to a degree to Criterion. They do more or less have the majority of their films tend to be art house films, foreign films, but Kino Lorber definitely does have quite a few exploitation directors or exploitation films within their titles, which is pretty amazing. Criterion, not so much. Mostly European films and art house films that could be considered to a degree exploitation movies, but for the most part, they are more of just European movies. But this movie is, I was see, it's hard for even me to describe this movie. I was my jaw dropped at the end of this movie, and my jaw dropped pretty much throughout this entire viewing of this movie. It's it almost was an experience of where I had feelings that I was never aware of, if that makes any sense. It brought these emotions on for me while I was watching this movie that were just so complicated and unsettling, uh, and also a sense of excitement and wonder, and this just an incredibly just an incredibly odd grouping of various emotions all at the same time, like I've never really felt before. It's a trip. It is a true journey. This movie is incredibly surrealist. It's very dreamlike. It has elements of horror. It's very spooky and very strange, very mysterious. It's incredibly erotic. I believe this movie, when it was released in many porn theaters at the time. From what I gather, I had never seen this movie before. I had never heard about it before, And from what I gather and reading about it, and there's some really great special features on this disc, this movie was kind of considered to be a porn, and I can definitely see that because there are elements of where, uh, well, there are so many scenes of the vagina. Jess Franco had kind of an obsession with the vagina, and so this movie really shows that, and it does show actual penetration. Because usually, for something to qualify as porn, is obviously if it shows frontal nudity, full frontal nudity, but if there's an actual scene or scenes of where there is actual penetration shown, then it's considered porn. This film does have that. There are numerous lesbian scenes that are just, well, in all intents and purposes, are incredible. But this film is incredible. But it takes a turn for into much darker and hard. It gets hard to watch at times. It's the only way I can put it. This movie is also, it's the story itself is kind of like your classic, you know, one who's about the Faustian kind of classic story of one who has the opportunity to have like incredible amounts of success, and but they, in order to do that, they have to kind of make a pact more or less with the devil. And that's kind of what this premise is, where this man befriends this woman who you kind of realize is the devil incarnate. And he, in order to have all of these riches in his life, he decides to have a commit to a pact with her where she will have to take something from him at some point in his life, and he essentially sells his soul to this woman to be able to have all of this success in his life. And all of this time goes by to where he does enjoy this life of incredible luxury because of this pact. But then the devil comes knocking, and he has to give the devil what he promised in order to have this, luxurious life. And oh my God, um, this movie is, I have to say, is one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen. It's also, again, it's one of the most erotic films, although that does change significantly to by the third or fourth act of this film, to where you're seeing things that are incredibly sexual and sensual and just just amazing. But then it becomes, at least how I reacted, it becomes this act of where it's completely disgusting and repulsive in like every conceivable way, and yet you have to sit through large scenes of where these things are being shown, and it's kind of a workout on your psyche. But with all that being said, I have to say this movie is uh, a masterpiece. It's amazing. Again, I have quite a few of his films, just Franco's films. Um, I don't know. At face value, this might be my favorite film of his. It's a whirlwind of emotion, and it definitely is. It's a very surrealist movie. You feel like you're in this incredibly darkly erotic dream, but it's so. Um, I mean, it takes on subjects that are obvious taboos and really explores them, and it really is at times repulsive and disgusting and hard to sit through, but yet it's so fascinating. It's such a fascinating journey, even when it does go to those incredibly dark places. It's one of the most hypnotic movies I've ever seen, and it is one of the most for all intents and purposes, like I said, one of the most disturbing movies I've ever seen in a lot of ways, where you're just not sure how to react, or you're feeling all of these different things while you're seeing these images, and you're at this place that you've never been at. That's how I felt watching this movie. I was watching this in this mindset of where I don't think I've ever had this kind of experience with a movie, and I don't think I've ever been emotionally in this kind of mindset. So many things going on at once. Um, there's a there's some really great special features on here that I've been watching. Stephen Thrower, who is a an amazing writer. He's an author. He did a quite a few years ago. He wrote an autobiography on Jess Franco. He is like the number one authority on Jess Franco, and he also is involved with many books in about films in the exploitation world. He's amazing. I can listen to him talk about the history of film, especially exploitation films, forever. I mean, he's such a fascinating guy. He is so knowledgeable. It's insane. And a lot of Blu-rays of these exploitation movies that I have, he is on many of them, giving these talking about a lot of these directors and a lot of these films. There's I have a collection of tons of great of interviews with him, and they're just amazing. It's like going to film school. Um, and his specialty is the world of Jess Franco. And in the movie, or in the special features, there's a really cool interview with him. And again, I think Jess Franco, out of all the directors that I know of, that I'm aware of, and again, I do discover new directors quite a bit. Um, but at this point, out of all of the directors that I know in the film world, say big budget Hollywood film directors or foreign film directors or exploitation directors, um, directors who specialize in documentaries, what have you. I am not aware of anyone who is or was as prolific as Jess Franco. Directors that I can think of that have a huge body of work. One that I can think of, which he's one of my favorite directors, is Akira Kurosawa. Um, huge, massive body of work. Another director I can think of, just off the top of my head, is like the American director John Ford. You know, who mostly made these epic westerns, but hugely prolific. There's quite a few others, but those are the two directors I can just think of. But just Franco's body of work kind of eclipses all of what those guys did. Like the sheer amount of work and the sheer amount of films. Obviously he worked with a lot less restraints because he worked uh, in the area of where he was an exploitation director, but so he worked with a lot less money. He had total control over what he was doing, complete control. There was no big, studio interference. But in this interview with Stephen Thrower, there he's talking about how at one point, just Franco was making almost 10 movies. There were certain years where he made 10 movies in one year. Like that's insane. It's mind boggling. And he was a real prolific director in the late 50s, um, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and probably his biggest decade for him as a director and artistically was in the 70s. This film, Lorna, came out in 75. Um, and again, I have quite a few of his films, and they're all so different, and they're all so original, so unpredictable, and they combine so many different elements of different genres where it almost creates this hybrid of its own, where it becomes its own genre. But it's amazing. And every year, from what I gathered, every year they are discovering more films of his that were, just kind of like fell by the wayside or didn't really get enough press or distribution. But my God, amazing, amazing film. And again, it's saying a lot. It's saying, an extreme amount. But at face value, I think this might be Jess Franco's greatest movie. It is, again, it is not easy to watch. It is a. It's not really even. It's not really even like seeing a movie in a traditional sense. It's like having an experience, like no other. But I have to say, at face value, I want to watch this again, even though I know it's gorgeous, beautiful, horrific, and completely disgusting. I want to watch it again. It's like fascinating, and but I have to say, at face value, since and again I've only watched this once. I watched it last night for the very first time. This might be my favorite Jess Franco movie. It's an incredible. It's a masterpiece. Yeah, it is a trip. And actually I said 75, but this came out in 74. And to think that this movie came out in 74 is like just mind blowing. Talk about pushing the fucking envelope. Holy shit. Amazing. So thanks again. Definitely check this movie out. Check out any of the work of Jess Franco. I have not seen any of his films. None of the films that I have discovered over the last few years or that I own, there's not one clunker in the bunch. They're all amazing. And again, he does have so many different genres that he pulls into, as influences. So I do think, and to a degree, well, first and foremost, they're definitely like sleazy exploitation movies, but he does. Some people are not into that. I get it, but they're just amazing. But genre-wise, if you're into certain styles, he does have so many different things that I think, style-wise, there's something for everyone in those movies. But this movie, I will say, you have to really brace yourself because I feel like it really goes places that is shocking. It's totally shocking. And I don't want to give anything away, but if you do see this film, which you should, be forewarned. It is not for the squeamish or faint at heart, but it's still, regardless of that, um, an incredible, just amazing. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.